So good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's Complete Guide to Light. Good evening, Mark. How are you?
I'm amazing.
Have you got over the fact
Been a
that
very long day, though.
it has been a long day? Have you got over the fact that you've been swiped? Yeah, that is amusing.
Yeah, I was last year. One of our young models was basically talking me through how to use one of the dating apps, and as soon as you said it, of course, I just thought it's a dating app, Jay. Sorry,
No, it's
it's
true.
my
Well,
mind
I've
how it
never done it
works.
before, but it was only you and I were talking about the GoToWebinar phone app just the other day, and somebody said I've lost Mark, or I can only see his thing. So I logged in live, and you sure as hell you can swipe. You can swipe Mark. So
I think my wife would love to lose me, to be honest, especially with all the insurance money due out. But hey go.
excellent. Right. Enough of us joking around. We've got lots to get through. We did do a quick chat about what this series was all about just at the beginning of last week's session there, Mark. So do you want to just quickly run through again what we're doing for anybody new that's joining us?
Yeah, the Complete Guide to Light was basically, I'm not writing books anymore, okay, because I always feel as soon as a book is written, it's dead, and basically the bought for book and so on, it's always out of date by the time you get it in your hands. You know, most of the books that I write, they were finished 12 to 15 months before they actually had a published date, and so on. I was getting frustrated. In fact, one of the reasons that we actually launched the Photographer Academy originally was because that we felt that it was quicker for us to actually create huge amounts of video with a really kind of low cost for the whole year for you to be able to watch as much as you want whenever you want, than actually go and buy the books and so on. So we decided to, Debbie and I decided that we weren't going to write any more books because the amount of time that it takes. Instead, we thought we'd put a series together for you guys based on webinar, but then at the end of this year we'll combine all the actual information that we're sharing with you during this webinar in an ebook, so at least people will be able to actually go back and watch specifically the things that we're talking about if they need a little bit more in depth on, you know, continuous lighting and so on and so on, instead of just the written word itself. So yeah, watch out for the Complete Guide to Light, which will be free to only members, not issued out for any marketing or anything else. It will only be available to the members, and that should actually be in autumn of this year.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I will give you the screen. And just while we do that, just to remind everybody, we do want you to interact with Mark tonight. So if you have any questions or queries about this evening or anything that we've just been talking about, please pop those through the question panel and I'll ask them where appropriate. Mark, I can see the screen. I can hear you loud and clear. It's all yours, mate.
Thank you very much. So welcome to the Complete Guide to Light Part 2. In this session, we're looking all about continuous light. Every part of this that we're doing, trying to break it down like a chapter in a book and things, really. So just kind of unraveling the kind of what some people feel is a black art. But honestly, you know, I talk about lighting as recipes, just like a chef does. Once you get the basics of the recipe, you can pretty much achieve anything. Both of my sons are chefs, some of you will know. One of them, when they do their interviews with people coming for jobs, he says, right, cook me a poached egg. And because he's Michelin starting, you go, what do you want about cook me a poached egg? That's all you want me to do? Well, that's where you're going to start, because if you can't cook the perfect poached egg, we may as well stop the interview straight away with it. And it's that, it is, if you can't do a basic understanding of a recipe, and a poached egg isn't an easy thing to do, but in the same way, photographic, we should be able to turn our hand to pretty much anything. So today we're on about continuous light. Okay, so it is part 2. So first of all, let's just talk about why continuous light before we kind of go on to all the other topics. So at the end of the day, we've got some images with diagrams and so on, but I want to cover these kind of main points that I've put together. So why continuous light to begin with? Then as far as what, if you were going to buy, what would you buy? And let's look at some LED versus tungsten as well. Then we're going to look at exposure control and metering and so on. Color balance to get the coloring right and mixing colors with ambient as well as with flash and within a room set. And then we're going to look at some diagrams about using continuous light. And then finally, we'll touch on some post-processing. So first things first, as it says, why use continuous light? Well, I suppose for a lot of photographers, especially those who are not used to using studio flash or metering flash, Probably LED or continuous light source will be probably one of the first things that you find a rhythm for, because obviously what you see is what you get. You do get into some really tricky scenarios though when you're trying to overpower light in a room, or getting into trouble when you're trying to power light on location. So not always is the case is what you see is what you get, but basically it'll at least be an easier starting point for you than perhaps a technique that you think with speed light. Perfect examples would be quite a lot of continuous light is used, whether it's fluorescent, tungsten or LED, in the likes of product photography now. Because basically, you know, they can have their own setup, their own rostrum, and then by putting it all in place, it's just flicking on a switch, firing up the camera, and basically putting the product in its location, and then just kind of turning it through its three dimension to actually record the images. And obviously, what you're actually seeing on the camera is actually what it's recording anyway. What you see is what you get though doesn't always is the case, because I think when you start to look and use LED or continuous light of some kind, you forget about the detail that is being blown out, because you're not metering more often than not the actual image. So a lot of people who opt for an LED will basically, you know, charge up a battery, plug it into the mains, whatever it is, switch it on and go, yeah, that's in a good enough place, let's shoot that. And then they're going to go through a series of dimming and brightening in a chimping way, we call it, when you're looking on the back of the camera. So I would say that because of the lack of technical ability, it might slow your creative development down. But we're going to be showing you some continuous light being used today for creative development as well, especially when we're mixing it with flash. So I would say that the main reason for you to jump into continuous light is what you see is what you get straight away. Definitely the setting up of the equipment is usually quicker, because it's usually charged up with batteries. You're going to arrive, you're going to stick it on a stand. If it's not already on a stand, you're going to press the on button, you're going to turn the dim, and basically you're done. So it can work in a very, very quick way. But I mentioned about putting on a stand, and that alone, you know, is the same time as it takes to put a speed light on. So really, in the quick setup mode, all I really solve in time is basically I don't have to meter for each light individually to get the exact power settings out of the flash that I would want, because obviously with continuous light, as I said before, you're seeing and getting exactly what you kind of see in front of you as such. For some, the cost can be a starting point for you as well. I've got some real variety of different products for you to actually have a look at tonight, to actually see the difference in the costings. But as far as the cost, it is quite realistic for you to actually jump in, to at least allow you to start to bring some 3D into your photography as well. Because remember, what we're really using light for in anything, whether it's flash or continuous light or even daylight itself, it's to actually start to create texture and depth within the image, so a three-dimensional kind of texture. And as the light crosses across the subject, as we can see in this shot with the chef, basically what it's doing is actually creating a highlight. The highlight is then becoming the main point of the exposure. Because of the exposure is now bright, it means that everything else moves into shadow. By creating shadow within an image, you instantly create a three-dimensional image. Okay, so cost can be a really great starting point. It can be a problem solver as well. You know, there's times when I've been out along a dockside at night and things really, excuse me, and as well as using the speed light, I've actually whipped out the LED, not only to give me some illumination in the scene so I can see all the setup, but at times, because I've got it at hand, I can start to actually mix it in. Because I'm using very low shutter speeds and I'm using wide apertures, it means that the LED or the tungsten or the continuous light of some kind is playing a part within the overall exposure. But in the same kind of breath, if you forget to switch it off, it becomes a problem and not a solver with it. So making sure that if you are using an LED in dark scenes, that you understand how it is affecting the overall exposure itself. And I suppose for so many photographers, especially press and PR photographers, the ability to use a light source that they can also use on all the time, because pretty much, you know, a lot of press and some commercial photographers, they need to shoot a little bit of video at the same time as they're doing the stills. And by having that continuous light source, they're not having to actually kind of switch it on and off. Don't forget, of course, if you're using a type of studio flash with a modeling bulb, theoretically, the modeling bulbs themselves are your continuous light source. Continuous light, remember, is not the ambient light in the scene, because the ambient light in the scene can change. The continuous light that you have, no matter what you choose, is basically going to be controlled by you to be as bright or as dull as you want it to be. So don't think of the ambient light within a scene as a part of the continuous light. Yes, it is, but of course what it's going to do as the day comes to an end, it's going to get darker, and your exposures that you were used to before is going to be affected because of the lack of the ambient within the scene itself. Jay, any questions there?
Only one or two at the moment, but actually thought it was really important when you were talking about the variety of LED lights that are available and pricing. The good question, which I'm sure we should, well, I know the answer, but you'll answer it. Could we start with lights from the likes of a DIY store?
We'll get there in a minute. I've got a whole what to buy going from a DIY store right up to the full photographic. Okay, so I've got all that.
Well, I wasn't privy to that, but I figured we'd be touching on it. But that's it for a minute.
Okay, all right. So before we move on to the kit, this is how and why a continuous light source would be good, perhaps. So what we've got, in fact, in this image is we're mixing flash and just Christmas lights wrapped around a shape in the background. But as we're mixing and dragging shutter speeds, and we're moving either camera, subject, or the actual light itself, they will all change the way that they interact with the end photograph. So for this kind of image, we're working in a darkened room. The modeling bulb on the flash unit is not going off. The illumination of the girl, just to get the focus point, would just be with a little small torch or flashlight. And then basically that is switched off. And as long as she doesn't move from her spot, we can get her to move and so on. So I can then move the continuous light source. So if we look at the image in the top left, you can see that the lights in the background are the part that is being moved, and she is moving as well. So she's moving into the light. So that's a problem by itself, yeah? And you can see a little bit of this through a few of the photographs. When we just move the camera, so in the middle image, this is a camera motion, not a product light in the background. So she still looks sharp, because the modeling light is switched off. The flash freezes her to create the exposure, the working exposure, but the ambient modeling continuous light, as it were, from the Christmas lights in the background, they're the only things that are going to record. So as I move the camera up and down, I create that shape. So it's good fun. I mean, continuous light has been a thing that we've used within the studios for a very long time, especially in the kind of the basic and the creative element as well. So this will give you a perfect idea of what we're going to talk about soon, about how we're mixing all the lights together and things, really. But you can see there's different exposures, there's different movements, different shapes and so on, all changing the look and the feel. But once you've found your recipe that works for you, you stick to it and you go from there. Jay, is there any question about that before I move on? Sorry.
Well, I think you just touched on it. So, because you talked about mixing lights, but the key question that came in was that do you just stick with the LED light source, or do you turn off the ambient, or do you mix them?
Okay, so this is in a darkened room. The speed light or studio flash has no illumination on the model except for when the flash fires. The only ambient light in the room is coming from the actual continuous light, which is the Christmas trees lights that are wrapped around the product in the background, and those are the only ones that are giving the illumination of this kind of light streaks. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it was a more general question, and obviously you're touching on that about mixing lights and light sources and effects now in the
Okay, so let's look quickly at what to buy LED versus tungsten as well, because that's something that we should discuss. So if you go back right to the early days of when we launched the academy known as Photo Training for You, you pretty much saw me whip out a little cheap torch, flashlight as they called it in America, to just add a little bit of a popper light in towards the face itself. And in fact, I just went through and I dug out the original Apprentices, which is the Wow Boudoir one. This is where we frightened to death, but this is the first time that LED showed its face on the likes of a full-blown shoot within the academy, even though it took a long time to actually get out there as far as the film was concerned. This was a series, and in here you see the LED lights being used. So if you haven't seen that film yet, I would definitely go and watch John and Ozzy cringe, as they basically are told that we're photographing boudoir, and it couldn't have been further from their kind of mission. But also you get to see how I talk through and introduce my cheap little kind of three-dimensional kind of video lights and things really. So the first thing, I would always encourage you to have a small little torch in your bag, no matter what. So the next time you're at one of those service stations and you see the offer for two quid, when you're paying for your petrol, you're buying one of these at the same time, and you put it in your camera bag, and it's going to be a part of your light source. Even in daylight, this can be used to actually pop a little bit of a catch light into the person's face. So good news about them, the likes of them, this one zooms. It's very lightweight, takes over no space in the bag itself. It costs buttons, and basically it's battery led, and obviously AAs or AAAs, depends on what you use. Inspection lights are really a good option. In fact, we used to have quite a lot of the Rolson ones. We were using these as lights that we used to move in the background behind a model or behind the subject to create light trails and so on. This one particularly that we're seeing is not dimmable, but in fact quite a lot of the inspection lights, so these are the ones that mechanics, engineers use when they're in a dark location, need to bring some highlight up, but they're very lightweight and very cheap. You'll probably spend on both the torch and one of these less than 10 quid. I think at the time when these were launched at the likes of Halfords, which is a UK kind of motoring spares company, I think we were picking these up for about £4 each, £5 each within things. There is also a wand by Rolson, which has a handle and a hook as well. And at the time, there was some kind of light wand being sold in the UK for around about £300 to £400. And the Rolson wand, which was costing around about 10 quid, was putting out more light and a more consistent light, even though it wasn't round in its lightsaber shape. It was creating more light, so it was really, really funny. And when we were using these on demonstrations, Jay, you could basically see people sick as a pig when they'd already spent weeks or months beforehand their 400 quid on a wand as such, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I do remember it fully. When really you just, well, I think we had them from Crassol, it's gone now, but yeah, Halfords had them as well. And it's just like, you're using those £10 from, yeah, it was amazing. But yes.
Yeah. But don't be afraid to look online for these and things, really. There's some great options out there. But I just wanted to see what we're doing. I didn't actually take a photograph of the Rolson wand. I should have done. I wonder if we can find that online, in fact. Let's just do a quick search. Rolson inspection wand. Images. Can you see on there, Jay? Can't see it now. But again, just have a look around, and it's basically double the length of our little LED Rolson inspection lights and things, really. But as I said, it's not quite of a lightsaber element, but it's still pretty cool. So then we start to move up the price bracket. So now we're in around about the 50 quid mark. These are little video LED lights that we bought, just a cheap import from China. I think they were costing us less than £50 each without the battery on the back. By the time we added a battery on, about another 15 quid, and basically it was perfect for the kind of the introduction. We're going to show you quite a few images shot under this kind of lighting quality as well. So what's the difference between the very expensive LEDs and these little cheap LEDs? Well, when the LED is baked, as far as I'm made aware, all the expensive ones, the really expensive ones, I mean, the medical and everything else is from the right heart of this kind of massive tray of LED lights and things. And as the lights get towards the edge of the baking, by all accounts, it gets less consistent, slightly different in color, and obviously hence get cheaper and cheaper as they go out towards the end. Whether all that's changed since years ago when I used to talk about continuous light, I've got no idea. But basically that's why they're cheap, is because the LEDs themselves are cheap. These put out, Jay, a huge whack of power, no?
Oh, they were phenomenal. I mean, you stumbled across it, didn't you? And then when we had one, I think, arrive, and we couldn't believe it. So I think we ended up, did we have 4 in the end, I think it was?
We still got them today, and we still use them today as well with it and things, really. But very, very cheap. This particular one comes with the barn doors, which you can see are the grey on the sides, a diffusion panel that drops down, and then a colour correction. But to be honest, the barn doors soon fall off. The diffusion panel loses so much of the light, it's not very good. And then the color correction, it's better to actually use a piece of gel than what's there. But let's take it, you know, at least they were trying. Radiates, the last light radiates. We used these for filming for a very, very long time, because we had the option to change the bulb from either a tungsten bayonet fit or to a fluorescent bayonet fit. And the Lastalite fluorescent tubes were daylight balanced. So it allowed us to actually use the tungsten when we were in a closed room set, and we were using the likes of all the Elinchron studio flashes and so on. So at least the lighting that was coming through the diffusion screens, or the light itself, looked whiter. Otherwise it would look orange, of course, yeah. Whereas the fluorescent, of course, would basically just illuminate the room when we're working more in a daylight level. Basically, everything that we've talked about now, except for that last little LED light, are switch on and off. The last one is dimmable. You can stick a reflector dish on these. We even have soft boxes on the end, but they are mains based, but they're less than 100 quid. As well as less than 100 quid, in fact around about the £50 mark, is a redhead. This is a tungsten light source, so we'll give a warm light similar to a room bulb. So you're either going to have to set the camera into a tungsten mode, or you're going to have to put a color correction gel in front of these. The negative to the redheads, they're very, very hot, but as well, when you move them and you kind of just drop it by mistake, it has a chance that it will actually smash the tube as it explodes, because it is so hot. There are wire meshes across the front of them to protect the explosion of the tube, but this is the kind of the standard thing that video people would have been using in the 80s and 90s, and even into the 2000s, before the kind of the bigger LEDs were actually becoming available. So it's dimmable. It has barn doors by design. It's great for all the Hollywood kind of look. It can be diffused because it is has the accessory holders on the front, and you can put a soft box, or you could put a diffusion screen in front of it, but it is mains driven. Then we start to get into a little bit more of the semi-pro, the entry-level LEDs. I've got the Manfrotto ones. So this is a Spectra 2. It comes with some color correction gels and a diffusion, just as a gel that's go in like a diffusion screen. It is dimmable, but looking at above 100 quids here, so about at 150 mark. But it can be run from both mains and battery. That's really what I'm paying for. So it means that if I'm using it in the likes of a food shoot or a commercial shoot in some way, I don't have to have loads and loads of batteries with me all the time, and basically it'll trickle charge the battery if it's plugged in all the time whilst I'm doing the shoot. So I'll always have a battery on the back as well. Then we get the kind of likes of the Yongnuo. We use a lot of the Yongnuo flashes, and they also create some real big light panels that are really bright, and ones that can be controlled by a remote control as well. The video light can be controlled in color temperature as well. So you're looking at 3,200 Kelvin up to about 5.5. So when we start to talk about color temperature, 5,500 Kelvin is technically daylight, 3,200 Kelvin is tungsten. So you've got that wide choice to actually be able to kind of color balance. This has an entry level. It is on and off, and you can dim it as well. It comes with barn doors, but once more, it's around about the £60 level. So if you're looking to invest in some more bigger LED lights, then definitely the Yongnuo is something to look at, but it is mains LED. Then we go into the more pro level of the Manfrotto ones, and this is up in around about the £300 mark. And there's a couple of options, one with just obviously a dimmable light, but you can also have one which is a dimmable light and a color changer at the same time. Once more, battery and mains, and basically allows me to actually just change the color balance on camera. And they also make a small little softbox for it as well. And then we get into the real pro end, which is more a studio video light. Headless are our option on here, especially the focus and spot ones. But we're looking between £800 and £1,300 for the kind of the standardized. The benefit of the headless, they're basically they're cold touch. So it means that they're not going to actually burn or break. You can pretty much leave them on all day and they'll just keep going. And basically you can move it around a studio environment and it's not going to actually smash its bulb or whatever it would be. This one though has a Fresnel focusing spot within it as well to control the sharpness of the light. Any questions on that, Jay?
No, again, the questions that I've got a feeling you're about to answer, because it's to do with like using it, why you would use it, and what you would use it for. So I'll hang on to it in case you know, rather than repeat things. Okay. And then the other one is what are your thoughts on the Rotolight units?
Okay, I've got no experience with the Rotolight units at all. The only ones that we saw when they were next door to a stand at a big photography exhibition many years ago, the only thing it was for me, they didn't have enough power. But I've not got any experience with them at all. I'm sorry.
Well, and like I said, the other one is to do with using the lights for different type of things, which I think you're about to cover.
Okay, so exposure control, as far as the metering is concerned, don't get frightened off with mixing light sources and so on. Okay, remember it's just a light source, and from here we're going to be able to actually kind of control what the light physically can do. Now, obviously, because a continuous light source is exactly that, a continuous light source, the only way, unless it's dimmable, to change its exposure value is to either move it physically closer to the subject or move it further away. Okay, so unless you've got a dimmable unit, the only way to change the exposure is to move it closer or further away from the subject. When we're metering, we're obviously setting our meters into a daylight mode. So that is usually identified on a meter with a small sunlight icon. So once you're in there, basically choose your ISO and either make the choice of aperture or shutter speed. The flash mate on the left-hand side, the 308S, only allows you to set the shutter speed. It then, based on your ISO setting, gives you the reading what is your f-stop to change. Whereas the Lightmaster Pro, which is the one on the right-hand side, you've got an option to either select to measure for the time to change or for the aperture to change. Now, as a rule, I tend to actually have to fix my shutter speed first. My aperture first. I need to make sure that is what I want it to be for depth of field, choice of lens, and so on. However, because of my age now and the shakes after years of holding cameras and so on, I can hold the camera less handheld. So I've either got to go to a monopod or a tripod if I'm shooting below realistically a 60th of a second. I can't really shoot below that anymore without some kind of camera shake on the image. So setting up the light meter to begin with, we're obviously into a continuous mode, which is the ambient mode signified by a sun icon on pretty much all light meters anyway. Now, when you're mixing light sources, let's talk about mixing the ambient light in a room compared to the LED light. So the first thing that I would do in a scene is basically meter without my LED light on to begin with. So I would see how bright it is. That is the first point of my exposure control, because I'm either going to decide to eliminate the light in the scene or use a part of it as far as the ambience is concerned. Obviously, if I need to obliterate most of the light within a scene, I need to get in, I need to overpower the subject, whatever it is, by more than 2 stops. Three stops is D-max black, so that will basically rule it out as no ambient light will kind of record within the scene. Saying that, if you've got room lights or high reflection points from anything that's polished, those will still actually show within the actual working exposure, even if it's a 3-stop difference anyway. So once I've actually metered for the ambient, I then obviously put my my chosen continuous light in place, and then move it either back and forth or dim it to match what I need as far as the working aperture is concerned. So more often than not, I want to use some of the ambient light within a room. So I'm usually going to be photographing 400 ISO, 125th of a second, and somewhere between f4 and 5.6. That would be my standard kind of working. Obviously, if I was shooting an interior of a hotel or something like that, where I need a much greater depth of field, I wouldn't increase the ISO. I'd basically just be dragging the shutter speed itself to a very, very slow shutter speed to correctly expose the ambient light and the continuous light source that I'm using as a mix. Don't be afraid of using more than one light, whether it's LEDs mixing or flashes with LEDs or ambient and LED, you know, whatever it would be. Obviously, if it's all in the same color balance, that really helps you. Otherwise, you've got to start to really worry about how color will change within a scene. But when you've got more than one, it's usually a good idea that, if possible, to switch off the individual lights one at a time and measure exactly what they are. So remember, the first thing would be to expose for the subject. That's going to be our working aperture. Then we're going to use separation lights, which are usually 1 stop or 2 stops less than the key, and they'll usually come from the 9 o'clock to the 3 o'clock position, like we discussed in the last session. A headlight would be once more set 1 stop to 2 stops less than the key light itself. And those will give you a good idea. But remember, one of the benefits we have with the continuous light is what you see is what you get. So as long as you're not mixing flash within the scene, you're pretty much guaranteed to get the result. When you do start to add flash within the scene, you've got to really decide on which is the overpowering element, or what the flash is doing and what the continuous light itself is doing. Like we just gave you that example a second ago to do with the dragging of the shutter when we just saw that image of the girl. The continuous light was the Christmas tree lights moving in the background, giving some illumination to the background as well, but really being used for the control of the brightness to create the background, whereas the flash was in fact our working exposure. But don't be afraid to mix flash in with the continuous light source, but remember, flash will pretty much put out way more power than any LED light or tungsten light will actually ever put out for you anyway. Any question on exposure control and metering, Jay?
Nothing's come through the question panel as yet, mate.
Okay, I know it's usually lags behind anyway, kind of thing with it. Right, 3 more sessions. White balance. So what are we doing on the white balance? Well, the first thing I would do is make sure that you start to understand the white balance settings on your camera. So I mentioned to you different color kind of light. So the incandescent or tungsten is signified by the light bulb on most camera settings anyway. Okay, so when we're using a tungsten or a room bulb light, most of the time it's incandescent. I mentioned to you as well about the Lastalite radiate heads that will allow me to use either an incandescent tungsten bulb or a fluorescent tube. Obviously, if I was using the tungsten, I'd be in the tungsten mode. If I was using the fluorescent bulb, I'd actually set my color balance on camera to the fluorescent. In fact, not with the radiates. The fluorescent that is signified here is a fluorescent standardized tube. I forget the working color balance on fluorescent now, but it's a cooler light. Obviously, it depends now because you can buy all the different kind of tubes to give you different color fluorescent lighting as such, but more often than not they give off a kind of a green luminescence, and that's obviously what we'd be correct in, and so that would actually be set onto the fluorescent tube. Direct sunlight, flash, cloudy and shade are more or less all in the same spectrum of color, so anything between around about 5,000 to 5,500 is in our color of daylight. So daylight would be for LED and the likes of fluorescent tubes if they're corrected to daylight, of course, and obviously flash. Okay, so understand the camera settings first and set it there as your first option. Custom color on camera using the likes of a gray balance card will pretty much give you perfect images straight out of a camera. So if you're using the likes of a Lastalite Easy Balance card, in the room set with the Easy Balance card, the grey card, okay, I would take a photograph, fill in the frame as much as I could with the grey balance card itself. Then in a Canon, I would go in and actually go into the custom white balance, select custom white balance. I would select the image that I've just taken of the grey card and now use that as the custom color balance all of the time. And that is designated, as you can see, by the little icon above here for the custom color balance. If I'm using a Nikon, we need the presetting. So basically it's a little bit quicker with Nikon. Surprise, surprise, it's the first thing that is. I'm just as a Canon man. Basically you press and hold the pre button until it starts to flash pre. Then you take the photograph of your grey card. Then it will come up with the signal of good. Once it's in good, it's set the color balance in exactly the same way again, and you're off and running. What I would encourage you to do though, no matter what, is take a photograph of the grey card, no matter which option that you do. So the Canon automatically shoots the grey card, whereas the custom balance with Nikon, we're using the pre, it doesn't take a photograph of the grey card itself. Now, if I was using the grey card, like we're seeing here, the Easy Balance in post-production, you can see I don't have to fill the frame with the actual grey card itself. If I was using it as a custom color balance, I couldn't have all the rest of the image visible because that would affect the color balance itself. So remember, you can custom color balance off anything. It always tries to turn it to gray. So if you point something at a red, a light red, or light blue, or light green, it thinks that's the color you want to turn gray. Neutralize the color, in other words, and it would do its best then by setting the custom balance to that. And it works exactly the same whether you're using a small little flashlight torch or you're using a LED or a cheap LED. It's really down to you. Okay, Jay, can I go on?
Yeah, you carry on, mate.
Okay, so then we look at using the continuous light. So I've basically kind of just chosen some images where we're looking at the light source. So with this girl here, we were doing video as well as stills. So it made it easy, and we wanted a Hollywood kind of look of light. So in fact, we opted for those little small video lights that we showed you right at the beginning of the session. 3 of them, as you can see here. One at the 6 o'clock position, which is above camera. There's a reflector below her, a triflector or reflector. And then we have two separation lights running. One is as a hair light that is coming on at the 1 o'clock position. That in fact is equal to the key light. And then we're using another light to the 11 o'clock position, and that is using it as an accent light. It's being allowed to spill onto the face just a little bit, but it is being controlled in the same power as the actual the key light itself. So the only thing that we're seeing is that she's being shaded enough from the light at the 11 o'clock, even though it's spilling onto the cheek in some way, because it's not over blowing out the information on the face as we can see in her photograph. So here in exactly the same way, now we've just either got her to lean towards the light more, move the main light closer to her, but basically just by her tilting herself in towards the light, moving closer to the light, or me moving the light in, it's increased the exposure value actually onto the face to give us this kind of blown out effect. And this is just going through a cross-processing preset within the likes of Bridge to actually give us the look and the feel, with a bit of softening be applied in the likes of Photoshop. So you can see across all of these images, we use the LED lights in this point because I was looking for that Hollywood kind of style. Look at the depth of the shadow, so you can see that the main light isn't being diffused in any way because of the very strong shadow. Exactly the same kind of idea to do with this girl. So still in the same way as far as the lights on stands, lights on boom arms and so on as well, except now the key light is actually at 4 o'clock position, and that is being softened with a small softbox. But again, we're going through this Hollywood style of lighting where we're kind of breaking with some traditions of today, where we're allowing accent lights to actually spill and kind of really bleach out on towards the face, including onto the nose. So if there was any light that I would kind of switch off here, it would be the 9 o'clock light or the 10 o'clock light. The 10 o'clock light specifically because that is putting the accent coming down the side of the face, putting shadow from the hair that is actually just spilling out as well. Plus it's giving a little bit of light spill onto the nose, and obviously that's where we're creating a highlight of something that it touches. Will then obviously in the opposite side create a shadow. In this case, it just brings the attention via the higher light itself. So here we're mixing a variety of those LED lights and the fluorescence. So because I knew I was working in black and white, I don't really need to worry about the difference in color balances. All I'm looking at is the controllability of the dimmability of the continuous light sources. So here we've just got same girl. We're just doing a quick high key image, exactly the way as we would do with flash, but slightly harder to do because of the limitations of the little LED lights. But we've got a softbox on the key light. Key light's at 5 o'clock. That's our working exposure, and then the background is being lit as bright as it can be. Fingers crossed we can get up to 2 stops difference because we've added that softbox on, and that will create a better white. In fact, this image needs some help to actually purely make the white of the background be pure white as it is. But when you start to look at this, you start to kind of look at yourself and you go, well, why aren't I using more continuous light if I like this kind of look and feel? I'll leave you with that question anyway. Same girl, just one light now. So this light is at the 4 o'clock position. Remember to adjust the height of all the lights depending on anything that might affect the catch light in the eye or might stop any light spilling into the eye. As a rule of thumb, I either want a catch light in the eye at 2 o'clock, as we can see here, or I would have a catch light at the 10 o'clock position if the light was coming in from the opposite side. The reason that the light is coming in from the right-hand side here is because of obviously the arm and the hand, which is raised to the head. If the other arm and the hand was used and the light remained on the same side, it would start to bleach out the detail of the skin of the arm, but it would also put a shadow onto the girl's face because of the position of the light. So you can see here, very, very similar look and feel to a speed light going through an umbrella, even though it's not being diffused. This is just actually the hard light itself and just controlling its height. two lights set up here, one to create a bit of a kind of a shocking modern Rembrandt. So in other words, we're bleaching out the side of the face to do with its position, bleaching out as far as the exposure is concerned to obviously give this kind of edginess to the image, allowing a little bit of the light to spill around on the opposite side of the face to hit that triangle just below the eye. So not a perfect Rembrandt here, an edgy Rembrandt, and it illuminates those eyes again, real pop. But of course, we've got that secondary light giving us separation onto the background. And then, of course, depends on the post-production, what we're doing, or the mistakes that you'll make by exposure. You can drastically change the look and the feel, like you can do with everything. So don't be afraid to mix light sources, but be aware of how their difference in color balance can affect the overall image. So remember, if you're using something that is non-daylight and you mix it with daylight, you will obviously affect the color balance, especially when the two of them mix together. So here we're just using two LED lights on location, so the room light, and now the lights are just moved closer and further away to actually create the light onto the subject themselves. So no softening at all here. Back to that chef image, this is three lights in fact. One is giving us an ambience to the room, just giving this overall detail near to camera position. Then we've got one at the 9 o'clock position, which is, the 1 o'clock position to actually create this big separation, but it's also spilling onto the background as well. Plus then we've also got an LED light giving some illumination in the background to kind of white light the chrome. This, I think, is one of the last shots we shot at the Olive Tree as far as the cocktails with LEDs are concerned. And this is a perfect example when I want to use cold light, so I don't kind of cook the glass or cook anything within it. So ice, as far as the condensation on the glass and so on, LEDs are perfect. And again, because this is a glass and it's a commercial product, I don't need any frontal light, just a small reflector card. So the lights are coming in here from the 10 o'clock and the 2 o'clock position to create the edge lighting. Similar here, in fact, but now we're using a 3 o'clock, 9 o'clock lights as strips, again, just to actually give us the lovely highlights running up from both sides. And then last but no means least is the chocolate bomb. This is a classic example. If you can see the detail on your screens where you have all the lovely condensation on the chocolate, if I was using warm light, tungsten light, or even the modeling bulb from my Elinchromes, probably I'm going to create a bigger problem with a quicker melt of the sorbet at the same time, as well as actually losing the condensation off the chocolate. So again, here we're running lights very close towards each other, 1 and 2 o'clock positions to create the image. Then we start to look at the Pro LED, just a couple of shots. This image is using the focusable spot. You can see it's, in fact, the diagram is showing it wrong. In fact, the light is coming in from the 8 o'clock position. It's very high. It's throwing a shadow onto the background wall. It's only the softening itself that is creating the kind of the glow overall. But again, it's a very strong style of lighting with it. Then we talked about the mixing of the light trail light. So in other words, just the Christmas tree light, or it could be a light wand, it could be anything that's in it. That's adding some light to the background itself. Here we can tell it's a camera that is being moved rather than the product with the lights on, because the red of the wall behind the flower wall is in fact out of focus and has the movement shape as well. But remember, the flash is the exposure onto the girl being controlled with no modeling bulb on it, switched off during the exposure, so the light trail doesn't bleed through her. And then just how to kind of just almost make you think, well, there's no light in here. Well, realistically, that's what light should be, isn't it? It should either be dynamic or it should be so subtle you question where it is within the scene. And this is just to add a little bit of highlight to the flesh at the bottom, just to actually give us that lovely, clean, milky skin look, than allowing any of the texture to be coming through. But just a slight illumination, but here coming in from the 10 o'clock position. Any questions on that, Jay?
We do have a few questions for you now, mate. Well, this is going back to what I hung on to, but you just touched on it by showing the food. Would you always opt now when photographing food for a continuous light source, or are there still times for a strobe or a flash?
Most of the time, because I'm doing so many shots during the course of the day, and because I'll have ambient light milling around in a restaurant, I would still opt for flash for most of the photographs, but I always carry the little Manfrotto LED lights with me in case I need to do a very, very cold dessert shot. To be honest, I'm so experienced with the food anyway that I could basically whip it in and out, but it just stops the frustration of chef getting annoyed at me because obviously they've got to go and replate it or kind of add new sorbet ice cream in there or whatever it would be. So I've got to have my technical ability ready to do the shot. So I always carry the Manfrotto little LED lights, but I'm usually using Studio Flash.
Well, and similar question from another source with regards to product photography. Again, would we be using LEDs for that, or would you be, well,
Yeah,
what's best for the job, really?
it depends how big the product is. When I'm trying to light a massive plastic, one of my clients, they used to do rotary molding, and they would do everything from a super sewage tank to go in the ground, which could be like 8 meters wide. It's very hard to photograph that in situation, so we basically used to shoot it out in the middle of a field and make the field go black. So then we were having to use flash to really control it, or we wait till nighttime and light paint it then with wands of light. So it really depends on what we're photographing, to be honest. As I said, if I was frustrating with product photography, or I was a graphic designer working for a company, as a part of my job I had to take some quick photographs just for the quick presentation before professional photography was bought, then I would definitely probably opt for the LED lights, because it will just give you a quick method of seeing what you are going to get on the back of your camera without fiddling around with the flashes. I would still opt for flash where possible.
Brill. Well, I guess this is similar to what we're looking at now, but not quite. Going right back to the first images you showed of the boudoir images with the Christmas tree lights, similar to what we're seeing in the background now.
Yeah.
The question was, what sort of shutter speed would you have used to have taken that?
It could be anything, a quarter of a second, half a second, depends on the exposure that I want.
Brilliant. Staying on then with regards obviously to continuous light, would you say that you avoid auto white balance?
Absolutely, like the plague. I can't remember when I used all the auto white balance last.
Brilliant. This is going back to what we were just saying about product photography. Have you got a quick suggested thing for jewellery?
Again, I would opt for now, in fact, continuous light in a white dome, because you get in really, really close. You're probably going to be working for long periods of time, and because it's what you see is what you get, you'll be able to actually see exactly any unwanted highlights or shadows within the image. So that's a great idea for jewelry, for use of continuous light. But I'd opt for the LEDs, dimmable ones as well.
So brilliant. Any suggestions? If I was looking to put an LED light in a largest softbox, would I be needed to look a bit more power, a bit more professional LED light for that?
Yeah, do you know what? You know the Yongnuo one that I showed to you at the beginning, the light panel with the side. It's about 60 quid. Let's see if we can find one. Oh, in fact, I wonder if I put a link in it. Oh, I did. You lucky, lucky devil, Cleghorn. That's luck. Might not be visible. Oh, it's still available. Okay, so again, I'd probably opt for something like this because it's cheap enough and it's not going to kill the bank.
Sorry, mate. We're seeing Bridget.
Oh, sorry. I'd opt for the likes of this, because it gives you the options and will pretty much do the job to begin with. It's electric bound to begin with. Obviously, it can take a battery as well, but at least it allows you to get up and running for, you know, not a lot of money, which is the key thing. Yeah. So again, for 60 quid, what was it? Less than 60 quid, wasn't it? 51 quid, you know, cheap as chips, and well worth looking at the kind of the difference with it. There's so much option that obviously it takes a little bit more of kind of research and so on with it, but there's different qualities and quantities of light and things as well. You've just got to do a little bit of the groundwork to make sure you're buying the right thing. So this has 600 LED optics here. It's a little bit more money and things really, but again, it starts somewhere, and you won't waste your money with these. Even if it's in your bag, you'll basically always be able to actually go back to it at some stage, adding it in. So if you just look into LED photography, I'm using Amazon for now, but basically anything is there. But you can see two light panels, 129 quid. So that's not even worth then going for red heads. However, you know, if you want to warm up a big space, using the tungsten light will actually add warmth into the scene as well as everything else with it and things. But I wouldn't say buy the 3-panel set first until you've bought one to actually see what these things are like. The only ones I've had experience with are the Yongnu's, as I was saying to you.
Brilliant, mate. That's all the questions for so far.
I talked about a light tent as well before and things. That's the kind of thing that I was on about, yeah? That's where you, but I would buy the one where you can peel back the sides. I wouldn't buy this. I would buy the Stylised if they still make it. Do you remember what it was called? The Cube, was it?
Yeah, it was the lighting table and the cube. It was called the Cube if they still do it. Yeah.
I think it was called the Cube, wasn't it? Stylised Cube. But again, you need to put the. There you go. It's still available. That's your best product, because then you can always black out the sides. But this allows you to put light from all of the 6 sides, as well as the underneath as well, and things really. So really good value for money, especially if you're doing the likes of jewelry, just being able to actually blank everything else with pieces of card and things. Okay, let's just touch quickly on to light balance. I went looking to see if I had the color card for this, but I basically delete the color card off once everything's kind of color balanced. But if we just duplicate one of these images for a minute, it's duplicate. All right, and we basically bring these both into RAW. Now remember, I'm just working through Bridge and Camera Raw. Bridge allows me to work through all the programs of Adobe seamlessly, and it's a part of any part of Photoshop you buy. Bridge is a download. Okay, so this is Camera Raw. If you're familiar with Lightroom adjustments, exactly the same. I might just find Camera Raw very, very quick to actually work with here, which you'll see a bit on Saturday as well, kind of thing. So if we were to just reset all of this image, is there a reset at all? No, there is not. Let me just reset everything. So just double click in on all of these. We'll reset everything back to as shot. Let's do the color balances as shot. Let's do the linear, no changes, saturation, double click. Is there an effects? Yeah, there is as well. And making sure the exposure is there. Okay, so if we were to look at this image, check the saturation as well. So this is the image as shot. You can see in the white balance, it's as shot here. If I change it through the different levels, you can see how the auto mode now, it might look like it cleaned it up to you, but it just made the skin tone go very white and pale. Even with that extreme amount of pink that the girl has got on, because there's so much grey in the scene of the background, it's able to make quite an accurate decision on what grey is. However, if that wall in the background had been blue, the auto white balance would have been totally screwed up with it. In daylight mode, when we start to look at the temperature shift, when we start to actually work through them. So daylight mode, as you can see, is 5500 Kelvin and a +10 on the tint. In the cloudy, so a colder, it would warm it up, so then it's gone up to 6500. In the shade, of course, it would be a cool light again, that would be even more, so that pushes up to 7500. And basically in the tungsten, it's down to 2850. So we talked about 3200 before, didn't we? And then in the fluorescent, you can see 3800. That's why it's working between 3002 and 55 as that color balance we saw on the Yongnu. And then basically in the flash balance, 5500 with no tint. And then obviously in the custom balance would be just down to you. So if we bring it back into as shot, if we wanted to white balance here, the first thing I would do is take the gray card and basically allow me to click it. So I would select all the images if they were all in here together. I would just pick up my white clicker, and if this was the easy balance, I would click onto that, and then that has completely set a neutral 18% gray tone without the image itself with it. So get out of the habit of auto white balance, otherwise it's going to really change everything from one color to another. Depends if I've zoomed in on this or zoomed out, it would change the actual color balance. You want a consistency of color balance. So when we see those two images together, you can see the look and the feel, the stylization I've given to this image compared to the how it was shot. So because this was shot with a headler, that's that high-end LED light, I've got an amazing color balance, true, accurate color balance, and I've got a consistency in the exposure between shot to shot to shot. But remember, this is a continuous light source, the headler with the focusable Fresnel. That's us, Jay, finished. Anything else, mate?
No, well, a bit of advice really, but I don't know. I'll read it to you. I can understand the question. It's a bit techie. Gentleman struggles when he's interpreting, the tech spec on the powerful LED and the tungsten lights from the manufacturer's numbers. Flash user guide numbers are more familiar and how powerful they are. For a reasonable power, what sort of power output do you think you would recommend?
It depends how close the light panel LEDs are going to be to the subject. As I mentioned all the way through this, you are absolutely going to struggle with LED as soon as you put some diffusion material in front. It's going to start to affect either your ISO going up or your shutter speed coming down. So as long as you accept the vulnerability of the light panels, there's no big problem with that. Tungsten by design tends to actually give you your biggest light for the buck. So in other words, for the amount of money you spend on a tungsten, the redheads, that's going to give you a huge amount of wattage kind of coming out. So I would just try and get into an idea of knowing what you're doing. So with the equipment that you have now, find out its spec, find out how you can translate it into what is continuous. But as long as a light is dimmable, you always, with LED and tungsten to some extent, want to buy more power than you can. Does that make sense, Jay?
Yeah.
So it's not like where I'm talking about studio flash and I'm discouraging you to buy the 1000 model when you'll never use the 1000 model, if that makes sense. What we're looking to do is actually buy the right product for the job. So in other words, if you're kind of just a hobby user, you'll probably want less power going through compared to if you're a pro user, you need the recharging and everything else within things really. So when we start to look at the headler, if you ever get stuck, Flaghead are absolutely amazing techie guys, yeah? And I know the headler is probably above most of your kind of budgets and things really, but when you're into serious amount of light, you want to start to look at what it's going to be doing. So in other words, the light power output on here, as you can see, is 250 watts. So that is more consistent with a light bulb times X. So that's the only way to really kind of translate between the two. If we start to look at the little...
We're still seeing it with you. I haven't changed your slide, mate. Sorry.
Oh, you? I do apologise. Yeah. Sorry. If you start to use the likes of the Manfrotto little LEDs rather than the professional the headler ones that we just showed, just have a little look about what output that they can put out. So remember, with the headler, we were looking at 250 watts, okay? But if you look, the light output that equates to 900 watts, that's what we would have missed there, because obviously this is LED and it generates a huge amount more brightness than anything else. So when we look here, they don't give us any real information, because they start to talk about 1600 lux at 1 meter. It would be much easier if they said it gives you f4 at 1 meter based on 100 ISO and things really. But of course, they're selling these in the equation of video lights. So basically, once you're into them, you know what you're buying. I'm sorry, I can't give you any more kind of real help on that. It's beyond my kind of spectrum.
And that is it, my friend. We're done.